Hey.
Well, I echo our chairman in talking about the inspiration of the Venezuelan opposition fighting for democracy. It costs, and it's not easy. Andres, thank you for doing a terrific interview. We were very privileged to share it today. It's also my privilege now to moderate this keynote congressional panel on ways to expand hemispheric opportunity through hemispheric engagement and trade. We've got a great panel to discuss this. Those of you who are from Washington insiders, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Their biographic information is in your conference packets. I would encourage you to explore their backgrounds. And for those watching on live stream, and I understand we have thousands of people online, I encourage you to go to our website, as-coa.org, for the speaker bio information. Maria Elvira Salazar chairs the vital Western Hemisphere Subcommittee of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. A Republican, she represents Florida's 27th district. Democrat Adriana Espaillat represents New York's 13th congressional district. Together, they are co-sponsors in the House of Representatives of the very thoughtful and innovative Americas Act, which has developed significant momentum and support across the US business community. And indeed, we heard Special Advisor Chris Dodd talk about it very favorably earlier this morning. It's developed a significant momentum, and when passed, the act will be a game changer for US engagement in the Western Hemisphere. Congress and the business community have both been open about the urgent need for a more robust US focus on the region. The Americas Act is a bipartisan, bicameral initiative that's generating quite a buzz, including the opportunity for expansion of USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, into the hemisphere. Chairwoman Salazar, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about the Act. What's the need for it, and what does it seek to do?
Well, thank you very much, and wonderful to be here. I certainly hope that everyone can hear, so I'm going to speak a little bit louder. I'm very happy to be here with my very good friend, Mr. Congressman Espaillat from New York. Bipartisan, Democrats and Republicans can definitely work together, and specifically when it comes to Latin America. We know that regardless of the administration, whether it's a Republican president or a Democratic president, Latin America has been forgotten or has not been remembered as much as it should, because it is very close to us. I mean, from Argentina, you can walk to Mexico. I mean, and then to Texas, you can actually walk. So that puts us in a very strategic and important position. So basically what America's Act does is that it sends a message to the Latin American countries is that if they shape up, or if they improve, or if they do a better job when it comes to democracy, when it comes to a judicial framework, respect the courts, respect freedom, respect democracy, freedom of speech, open up your markets, then the United States will be able to put you on the list to join the big boys club, meaning the USMCA, which is the gold standard of trade agreements. So I would love to see a Honduras or Guatemala, or of course Nicaragua, of course Venezuela, if they would change their ideological, the way they are thinking, and not repressing their people anymore, to join this club and then create this magnificent trading bloc from Tierra del Fuego all the way down to all the way up to Canada, and be a very powerhouse when it comes to trade. Because trade does jobs, it gives jobs, it creates prosperity, happiness, and it allows you to stay home. So that's what we're trying to work.
Congressman Espaillat, the chairwoman has already used the word bipartisan, and indeed this is bipartisan and bicameral. That's rare in Washington today, isn't it? How are you seeing these issues?
Well, thank you first for inviting me, and I want to thank my colleague, Maria Elvira Salazar from the sunny state of Florida. I represent the Empire State of New York.
That's right.
And so this is an important issue, because beyond the incentive that it creates for countries to be democratic, to respect the rule of law, to really work within the parameters of what strong democracy should be, I believe that the devil is in the detail, right? And the details of this bill is very specific, right? It does away with several things that are very harmful. One, it addresses GSP, which is a generalized system systematic preference system that gives a preference to Asia. And for many years, that system has created the incentive for jobs to be pulled out of Caribbean, Latin American countries. So it really stops that. We stopped that in 2019 with the help of embassies, American workers, and advocates, business groups, right? So it does that. It also does away with de minimis. De minimis is very harmful. So it reduces the threshold of de minimis from $800 to $200. Now, de minimis is a way to circumvent duty responsibility taxes, and it does away with that. So that's what it stops. What it provides $60 billion in loans for folks that will now do business in the Americas, and it provides a grant of $550 million for textile, apparel, and also for medical devices and equipment. So you're talking about a $1.1 billion grant and $60 billion in loans that ultimately will help reduce the trade deficit for the United States. It will strengthen, of course, the relationship with those countries. It will fight back against China's incursion in the Americas. And finally, I think what it does effectively will do is that it will address some of the root causes of migration in the southern border by creating jobs and opportunities in those countries.
What's the key to getting this passed? Because in Washington, it's important to have a bill, but it's also important to get 218 votes in the House of Representatives. How do we get there? This is an election year. There's polarization. Trade has come up several times in this conversation earlier this morning, and the politics of trade. It's complicated. How do we get there, Chairwoman?
Well, I think he would agree is political willingness.
Yep.
Political willingness from the White House, which we have understood that the Biden administration likes this bill and that is looking upon favorably on it. I think it has to do with the markup. First of all, it needs to be marked up by the Ways and Means in the House. So the Republican leadership needs to bring it up. Then after that, it has to go to the Senate. And there, the Democratic leadership needs to bring it up. So you see, it's a give and take from both political areas or arenas or sides to understand that this is a very important issue, which is what happened with Ukraine. Look at the back and forth we went through, and at the end, Johnson did the right thing. We gotta give the Ukrainians what they need, the military equipment. Don't stall it anymore. So it's the same concept. Don't you agree, I think, Adriano? It's just having the political willingness from both sides to move this forward. And this is not only a trade bill, this is also an immigration bill. Because if you give jobs to people, people stay home. Who wants to leave your house? So political willingness.
Speaker Johnson is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, correct?
Correct. Yeah, Mike
right.
Johnson, the new Speaker of the House.
Just for those who may not be overly familiar with the U.S. system. Thank you for that. Let's return to Congressman Espaillat. You know, we also talk a lot about nearshoring and the opportunities for, you know, the pandemic exposed some real, you know, inflexibilities in supply chains, and we recognized an overdependence perhaps on certain regions of the world and the opportunities that exist, you know, literally right next door. Does this act, or more broadly, are some of your efforts in the House designed to capture some of that investment, capture some of that business flow with Latin America and the Caribbean? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Absolutely, and we saw what the pandemic did. You know, we know that that was a weakness that we have that we must overcome. And this particular bill also makes permanent the partnership with those countries that are now working with the Biden administration. The Dominican Republic, of course, is one of them. Costa Rica, Panama, and Ecuador, they formed this partnership.
This is the APEC.
The APEC countries, it stabilizes and puts them there permanently, and it provides benefits for them with regards to two of their main exports, which are, of course, textiles and apparel, as well as medical devices and equipment. In addition to that, I think it's important that we take a look at the artificial intelligence revolution. And I have a resolution that I hope my colleagues signs on to. That
Anything for you.
Thank you. I appreciate
You
your
heard it here,
friendship.
ladies.
Of course.
Well, that
What
resolution.
does it say?
that resolution calls for a hemispheric strategy for AI. I think we lack that, right? And if we don't develop a hemispheric strategy, then all the biases and weaknesses that have been in the technological revolution will be dragged in and will push us 1,000 years behind. So I think it's important that we discuss that as well. But this bill certainly strengthens our partnership with our friends. We should reward our friends, right? That's a fundamental political science 101 concept.
Of course.
Reward your friends. And for far too long, we turned our heads and didn't look to the hemisphere and looked elsewhere, and we're paying the price for it.
And I want to pick up on exactly that point. And we've talked a lot about it already this morning. You've both spoken about it eloquently prior to this session and certainly in this session already. It's a feature of what the Council of the Americas tries to raise all the time. Look, the opportunities in the Western Hemisphere are profound. And yet, we always come to conferences like this and we say we're not paying enough attention to the region. Why is that? What can we do? And I've been asking this question for 35 years, so I don't have the answer. And it's not a leading question. It's a genuine question. How do we change that dynamic somehow to recognize the importance, the connectivity, the partnership? It's not a perfect region, but goodness knows other regions of the world have difficulties as well. Do you have any thoughts on that you could help us think through? Why don't we start with Congressman Espaillat?
Yes, I think perhaps since the Kennedy administration,
Right.
with the alliances, right, for the Americas, right?
Yeah.
You haven't seen a major robust initiative in the Americas that help to incentivize a working relation between allies and the United States. We must go back to that.
Yeah.
And again, de minimis is important. GSP is important. And this bill is very important. That's why the White House, the Department of Commerce, is still providing comments on this bill so we could strengthen it. The Biden administration has placed a lot of political capital on this bill. They understand that as we see a situation at our border, we must just not do immigration reform or border security. We got to really attack the root causes of migration in those countries. And so let's work with our friends and let's expand the opportunities to other countries in the hemisphere to join in. This doesn't mandate that you join USMCA. It leaves and it works within the framework of CAFTA-DR. And I think that's important because we should respect also those trade agreements that we have right now.
Yeah.
But we should expand opportunities for other countries that choose to go in.
Chairwoman, what can we do?
I think that expanding on what he's saying, look, he's a perfect example of the Dominican presence in New York City. And they have a fantastic representation in him. I'm a very good example of the Cuban exile community, the Nicaraguans and the Hondurans, the Central Americans and the Venezuelans and the Colombians in South Florida. The more our populations, and we are the largest minority in the country. We are 20% of the population. So we have a very big voice. But one of the issues I see is that our constituents need to be more involved in politics. Tip O'Neill used to say, all politics is local. So the more locally you get involved, look at the Venezuelans now. They're really getting more involved because they know that they need to come to Washington and influence. And he's the perfect example. Look at in my Dignity Act, which is another anecdote, he fought for his constituents, and and they were taken care of in another initiative that I introduced for immigration. So our people need to wake up more and demand their elected officials to be involved in their countries of origin.
Talking about organizing the diaspora communities more in the U.S.
Voting more,
Yeah.
more organized. I think you can definitely talk about that.
Well,
Yes, sir.
we've got a political year upcoming.
Yes.
We're going to have the chance to vote in November. Without being partisan, because Council of the Americas is nonpartisan, we don't know who's going to be elected. We don't know the shape of the Congress or the Senate. But if you had a magic wand, not who would be elected, but what advice would you give to the next president and the next Congress about policy toward the Western Hemisphere, nonpartisan? Just what would you say if you had 30 minutes with the next U.S. president, whoever he is, say, for Latin America policy, this is where you need to focus and concentrate. Chairwoman, let's start with you.
Well, this act, the Dignity Act, pass it through the House, pass it through the Senate, sign it into law, and start sending this very strong message from the White House that we care about Latin America and that you, country A, country B, you need to shape up your act and be part of the big boys club. And someone who's doing it beautifully is Milei in Argentina. And he's attracting all this foreign aid and this foreign investments to a country that, for what? He said it, 80 years has been being guided by the wrong ideology. Now it's time to go free trade, freedom, liberties, let people be, invest, and no one will leave Argentina. So I think that that's the moral reference right now. Argentina is the example. And with the Americas Act, we can definitely help those countries get to that, open up the markets so their people can stay home. It's very simple. You have a good job, then you pursue your happiness any way you want to.
Yeah, if there's no incentive to leave, why would you? Congressman Espaillat.
Life is hard enough.
Yes.
So
Well,
stay home.
Tip O'Neill did say that all politics is local, but he also said...
What else did you say, Adrian?
He also said that the biggest mistake in politics is not to ask.
Yeah. Yep.
Because at the end of the day, the worst that could happen to you is that somebody says no.
Okay.
So I think that the countries need to come in and ask.
Right.
And I think that this is an important piece of legislation. It's bipartisan, bicameral. The Americas Act, I think, addresses trade in the hemisphere. It updates all the trade initiatives that have occurred in the past. And the Dignity Act, which we're both a part of, and the Congresswoman leads that, is comprehensive immigration reform. So I would tell a new president, pass the Dignity Act.
Yeah.
And of course, if we're in the majority, I will carry that bill. And I hope she will support it, yes. As well as the Americas Act.
Yes.
So I look forward to continuing to working with Maria Elvira Salazar. And the margin of majority is so narrow in Congress that there is no choice.
Right.
We have to work together because they will lose 10 votes.
Right.
And those 10 votes will have to come from our side or vice versa.
Right.
So we're forced into working together and bipartisanly.
That's correct.
I think that's good for democracy, that's good for the U.S., and I think it's good for the hemisphere.
I agree.
We only have a couple minutes remaining, and we have our keynote speaker, the President of the Dominican Republic, who will be with us shortly. But before we get to that point, one final question for both of you, because in addition to the Americas Act, the one issue that does seem to unify Congress, left, right, center, Republicans, Democrats, everybody else, is China. We've seen China's incursion into the region. We've heard a lot about it today. We've heard a lot about it for months and even years up to this point. Is the U.S. doing enough, I'm not saying necessarily to counter China, but to promote what we're doing? And presumably, the Americas Act is part of that strategy, but are there other things that we can or should be doing? Let's start, Congressman Espaillat, with you, and we'll give the last word to Chairwoman Salazar.
Well, President Biden just this week approved additional sanctions to China. I think there are three countries that are really rogue countries that are presenting a threat worldwide, and that's China, Russia, and Iran. And not just in the continents that they're in, but I think their tentacles stretch to the Western Hemisphere and destabilize the Western Hemisphere. So we must address that. I think we do it by passing pieces of legislation like the one that we're both associated with. Investment in the hemisphere. I was successful in pushing for, with the help of the Congresswoman, in pushing for an increase in the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative. We were also successful in doing other initiatives in the Western Hemisphere. So we must invest. Our words cannot be empty. They have to have some meaning, and that means dollars, public policy, legislation. And I hope that the administration will continue in that role.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with him that words cannot be empty. And this administration has done, the previous administration imposed sanctions, but it has to be a policy of state. We know that China, it's a communist regime. We know that they have no accountability. They know that they are trying to penetrate Latin America. We know that in different countries they are buying for dual usage, and their intentions are not good. We know that. So our intentions are good. We're not perfect, but we have better intentions, more noble ones than the Chinese. So we got to do everything possible. I believe in the nearshoring and the reshoring right now more aggressively. We know that they have a 100-year plan. We know that we could be in a military confrontation over Taiwan at any point. So all those points send the message to any administration that China is the #1 issue. We know it is, but we need to do more now.
And in that scenario, the Western Hemisphere becomes even more important, no? Because, you know...
It's ours.
Well,
it's our hemisphere.
In terms of trade, yeah.
And we know that every single Latin American country wants to do business with the Americans before they want to do business with the Chinese or the Russians or the Iranians. I mean, we know, we're Latin Americans. Latin Americans love the United States, and they're always begging, please come more. Bring the American companies. Come. We know it. It was reported for 35 years. I saw the influence of the United States. It's like the father, is that the son who once is claiming and desiring for the father to pay more attention to them, and it doesn't, and he doesn't.
Well, I want to thank both of you for your leadership, because truly, what you're doing now would change the game. If it passes and moves forward, fully implemented, all these things, there's a long way to go. We understand that. But we were very encouraged by the response of the administration and White House to the effort earlier today. So it does seem as if things are beginning to align. Hopefully the politics will continue along that path. But if it's bipartisan, bicameral, and the business community is fully supportive, I think you're getting some positive momentum there. We do have one additional speaker who has flown all the way up from Santo Domingo to join us. So we're going to call a close to our session here. But with one final item of business, would you please all join me in thanking the congressmen for their terrific comments today?
Thanks to you.
Thank you.
All right.
We are not going to take a break, but there will be a short transition. So please just be patient, and we'll bring the president in shortly.
That's to the left.